Hello, my most amazing artists. Last week, we finished tracing our self-portraits and our contour lines of our face, the most important parts, just the outlines of your head, your neck, and your shoulders. Now, after you were finished tracing your contour lines on your tracing paper, I taped it onto a piece of styrofoam. Everybody should have gotten their styrofoam already last week and begun tracing at least 2 times with a pen, one with black ink and one with colored ink. That way I could tell that you really traced 2 times. Then, after you traced with pen, you might have had to have done it a 3rd time because some people weren't pressing hard enough. You'll know if you were pressing hard enough because you should be able to see and feel all of the indentations of your face. If you are missing any lines, it's important that you put that piece of tracing paper back on directly lined up with the same lines. If any 2 lines are too close together, it will create a puddle of ink when we are starting to print today. When you are done or think you're done tracing with your pens and you finally lift off your tracing paper carefully, you are going to take one of these styluses where you can trace over your lines one more time to make sure they're deep enough. This is a super important part of the process. That way it doesn't get ink directly on your printing plate or styrofoam, but still carves in and makes sure that those lines are deep enough. You can borrow a stylus from the front of the room. Then you will have a printing station at your table. Today we are printing with black ink. Ink is permanent, and this is the kind of ink that you use to make prints like a printer. Today you are becoming that printer with a brayer. This is called a brayer. It rolls up and down side to side. It's also called a roller, but the fancy printmaking word for it is a brayer. When you're ready to print, you will make a tape ring with the roll of tape, meaning that you pick off a piece and you roll it backwards so that it becomes double-sided. You stick those sides together, so now it's sticky on both sides, and I'm going to stick it down to that book. It's just a book of recycled paper or catalogs that we don't need anymore, but we're going to use to keep our areas nice and clean and keep the ink on that. Same thing goes for this printing plate over here. This is where you roll out the ink. It's made out of glass and duct taped around the corners. It's important to keep the ink inside of the duct taped areas. Do not go outside of the duct tape because you need to keep that ink on your tray inside of that rectangle. You only need to roll the ink up and down and side to side in the same spot. The goal is not to fill the whole glass plate with the ink. It's just to get a nice even coat on your brayer or your roller. You'll know you have a nice even layer when it's making a sticky sound, but it's not too thick. If you have any globs of ink on that brayer, it's not going to make a good print. The goal is to get it nice and even by rolling up and down and side to side multiple times until it makes that really sticky sound. Let me see if that's the sound that you want to hear to make sure that your brayer is nice and evenly coated with nothing too thick. If it's too thick, your print will not come out very good. So once you have your brayer ready, you are going to pick it up and begin to ink your printing plate or your styrofoam. But before you can even start inking your printing plate and rolling it onto your print, you are going to need to write your name and class code on a piece of paper. The printing is going to happen on a piece of paper. That's what you need. Just like a printer, you now have your ink, you have your materials or your tools, and now you need your paper. Well, I don't know exactly how all of you made your self-portrait, so it's still important to write your name, even though it's still a picture of you. These will be going on the drying rack when you're done, so everybody needs to write their name because you will be having multiple prints or as many as you have time to make today. The first one is called your test print because sometimes your test print doesn't always come out the best. It's a test print, it's just your first one. It's the first time you've ever made a stamp before, most likely, and the first time you're going to print. You are going to keep your printing area nice and clean by making sure that when you pick up your roller, you are only rolling up and down and side to side on your printing plate or the styrofoam. You do not need to roll it all over that book, but if you do get a little bit on the book, that's what it's there for. We can always rip off the page and throw it away for the next person if they need a new clean plate. Now I'm going to carefully pick up my paper and press it down onto my printing plate. Once I start to see the lines through it and it's stuck to the plate, I'm going to pick up something called the baren. Now this baren, yes, it looks like a lid because it is. I don't have the real fancy printmaking barens because they are expensive. But a baren is a tool that lets you rub the ink onto a piece of paper and transfer it over. So when I use my baren, I am holding the paper down in one area and then rubbing in a circular motion while applying pressure. This transfers the ink onto the paper. I make sure that it comes out nice and clean by carefully peeling back one side of the print and then looking at it. Now, this is ink and it is permanent, so make sure that if you have any on your fingers, you're not touching your face with them. You are making sure to put that print right on the drying rack when you are done. Then you can do a few as long as you're letting other people at your table team do their prints first. So it wouldn't be quite fair if you were making several prints if there's somebody waiting. So please be courteous of those people who might be waiting. And if you've made one test print, let them go ahead and do theirs, and then you'll wait in line to make another print. You can make as many prints as you have time to do today, but everybody needs to make at least one test print today. I hope you see why it's important to carve your lines in really well. As you can see, my eyes, when I was carving into my styrofoam and when I was tracing, they were a little too small. Because I had my iris so close to the pupil and the outside of my eyelid, it created a blob. Like I said, if you have any two lines too close to each other when you're tracing, it's going to create a big blob. Hopefully, your eyes came out a little bit bigger and better and will show up better in your print. But this might happen to some of you, and that's okay. It is pop art. It's made to be a little silly, a little different. It doesn't have to look extremely realistic. It is still a really cool concept that you get to print yourself a bunch of times today. Again, today we're just using black ink as our sample. Next week, you'll have lots of different colors to choose from once you have this printmaking process down of rolling your ink with your brayer, rolling your printing plate side to side, up and down, getting an even coat of ink on it, and then picking up your paper and pressing it down on there and using that baren to transfer the ink in an even and circular motion. Once you have a few prints and our time is up, it's time to put them on the drying rack and clean up. You'll see I make a few more prints here just to show you what it's like if you make some mess up prints. And that's okay, it might happen today. We're not going to throw them away, we're going to keep our mistakes even if you don't like them. You will have plenty of more time and future days of art class to print using different colors as well. Today is a test print day. When I'm done with my printing plate and it's time for the next person to print or time to clean up, I carefully peel it up from the paper. I do not want to rip my styrofoam, but I can rip the paper out of the book. If I need to, I can rip this paper out and throw it away so that the next person can use a clean piece of paper when they're taping their styrofoam or printing plate to the book to roll their ink onto it. So it's important that you go ahead and clean up before the next person gets there. You also always want to keep that ink in that middle of the duct tape. That way you are not making a big mess, because if you leave the brayer handle in the ink, the next person's going to pick up that handle to roll their ink and then get it all over their hand. So please make sure that you are laying that handle down in an area that is not covered with ink. That's why you only want to keep that ink on the glass in one area, not even all the glass, and leave it kind of hanging off. Now, something I have not been doing is writing my name and class code in all my papers. Whoops. I hope that you make sure to do that before you press it down into place and start seeing those lines through. Once you press it onto the ink and can start to see you coming through, then you know it's time to pick up that baren and start rolling it. That first step of sticking it into place is so important because once you do, you cannot move it. If you moved it from there, your whole print would come out not so nice. So once it's stuck down, even if it's hanging off your paper and it doesn't fit, you're still going with it, because once it sticks, that's the print it's going to make. Now you'll notice it's starting to make a ghost print because that ink is starting to get a little dry. Miss Q is the only one that's going to be applying the ink to your glass rolling plate today. So it's important that if you need more ink, you raise your hand and I'll come over and put a little squirt of ink onto that plate so that you can roll it out again and your prints don't come out light like this. There's two reasons that your prints could come out very light like this one did, and that's either if you don't have enough ink or maybe you didn't press hard enough with the baren when you were rolling and rubbing that print into place and transferring it over onto your paper. Once you have a few prints, you're going to carefully take them to the drying rack. This is probably not the best way to take them because, as you could see, I could easily drop it and it would fall on the floor and stain the carpet or the tile because it is ink. Because it's ink, we will also be wearing aprons. But there's a lot of us in here today, so we're not using the sink. To clean up today, we're going to be using art wipes. If I see that your table is all done and has your prints on the drying rack, I will bring you each a large wipe. That way you can use it to wipe off your hands and not use the small ones in your bin. But they are always there for you if you need them. I'm going to use a wipe to wipe my hands first, and then I'm going to wipe my printing plate off. We want to get the black ink off of our printing plate or styrofoam so we can use it again next week, but with different colors. If we left that black ink on there, it would mix with the color and not come out so nice. So I'm using one to wipe it clean, and then that's good enough. We can always use the sink if we have to, but I'll have somebody do that all at once so that we don't have to have everybody running up to the sink with their inky plate. It could have some accidents if we dropped it, or if it gets drippy and wet. Not a good idea, so we're going to use an art wipe to wipe it off and clean up our hands and area today. All right, awesome artists, I cannot wait to see your very first prints. Remember, it's just a test print day. It's all about getting that printing plate ready, getting those lines carved deep enough, making sure you've done it at least 2 or 3 times and can feel them with your finger. And if you can't, you need to go back and trace again. And then finally, when you're ready, you can start the printing process. I can't wait to see your prints. Have fun.